Do you know that every year, nearly 1,500 teenagers are involved in violent crimes? Abuse affects 1 in 7 children. But what happens when the cycle of trauma turns deadly? A quiet Georgia neighborhood, where trust was as common as the sound of children playing in the streets, was about to be shattered. It began with a 14-year-old boy who found comfort in a family that treated him as one of their own, a family that offered him warmth when his life had been nothing but cold. But on a rainy January afternoon, everything changed. How does a bond that felt so unbreakable turn into betrayal? And what drove this young boy to commit an act that would leave a family in ruins? Welcome to True Crime Stories Vault. For more gripping stories like this, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in the shocking events that unfold. From the moment he first wandered into their lives, Aaron Schmidt was drawn to the Callahans in a way he could hardly explain. To the outside world, he was just a boy from a troubled home, a kid who preferred the woods to his own house, where walls echoed with anger and neglect. But to Aaron, the Callahans were a revelation, like stepping into a life he'd only seen in dreams. Their home was full of laughter, the kind he had never known. Dinner wasn't just food on the table, it was warmth, conversation, and the kind of belonging that he had spent years longing for, but never dared to hope for. Paul and Betty Jo Callahan didn't hesitate to welcome him. Their kindness was unguarded, their trust unquestioning. But as the months passed, that bond began to strain. It wasn't any one thing. Maybe it was the small ways Aaron overstepped boundaries, ways that seemed harmless at first, but became harder to ignore. Maybe it was the quiet anger he carried, an anger he kept locked away, but that seemed to simmer just beneath the surface. For a family like the Callahans, who had only ever shown Aaron kindness, the shift was subtle but unsettling. Aaron's connection to their daughter Alana was no secret. To him, she was more than a friend. She was a bright light in a world that had always been dark. But when she tried to put boundaries on their relationship, Aaron felt something break, not just between them, but within himself. His safe place, his sanctuary, began to feel like something else entirely. And then came the moment that changed everything. A single confrontation, a mother setting rules to protect her home, turned the warmth of the Callahan household into something Aaron couldn't reconcile. A door that had always been open to him was suddenly closed, and the boy who had once felt like part of the family now stood on the outside, looking in. What happens when the one place you feel safe is taken away? For Aaron, it was a question he wasn't ready to answer. And for the Callahans, the trust they had so freely given would become the foundation of a betrayal they could never have imagined. Alana Callahan had a way of lighting up every room she entered, not with grand gestures, but with the quiet warmth of her presence. At just 14 years old, she embodied everything that makes a life feel full of promise. She spent her days riding four-wheelers through the woods, laughing with her siblings and singing hymns with her church youth group. To those who knew her, she was more than just a teenager. She was a source of joy, a kind spirit who loved fiercely and never hesitated to help a friend. Her faith was her foundation. Alana believed in doing what was right, even when it wasn't easy. She carried herself with a maturity beyond her years, balancing the carefree moments of youth with a deep sense of responsibility. She loved her family, adored her friends, and approached every day with an energy that made others feel lucky just to be in her orbit. For Aaron Schmidt, Alana was something else entirely. To him, she wasn't just a friend, she was an anchor in a world that often felt unsteady. Her smile, her kindness, her openness, they were like a lifeline, offering him a glimpse of a life he desperately wanted but could never truly grasp. But even Alana had her limits. When their friendship began to feel like something more, she did what her faith and her heart told her was right. She drew a line. To her, it wasn't a rejection, It was a decision born of love and understanding, a way to protect the bond they shared, without letting it grow into something they weren't ready for. But for Aaron, that line wasn't just a boundary. It was a wound. What Alana saw as a simple act of maturity, Aaron saw as yet another loss in a life already filled with them. And as her light continued to shine, his darkness grew. She couldn't have known that her decision, made with the best intentions, would set the stage for the unimaginable. It started with a decision by Alana's mother, a decision she believed was necessary. One afternoon, she and Alana returned home to find Aaron inside, uninvited. The doors had been locked, yet somehow he was there. His explanation, that he'd let himself in because he thought they'd be home soon, didn't sit well with her. This wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a violation of trust. Aaron was banned from the house. 2 weeks. Her voice was firm but not unkind. It was a boundary she felt was fair, a way to make it clear that trust had limits, even for someone they cared about. But for Aaron, those words weren't just a reprimand. They were a rejection. A door slammed shut in a life already filled with locked doors. The punishment felt unbearable. Every day he passed the house he once called his sanctuary, its warmth now a constant reminder of what he'd lost. Aaron's mind spiraled, replaying the scene over and over, each time twisting the narrative further. To him, it wasn't just a temporary ban. It was proof that he didn't belong, that even the people who had given him a chance had turned their backs on him. His isolation grew heavier with each passing day. He watched from a distance as life inside the Callahan home carried on without him, every laugh and every moment of togetherness, a sharp reminder of what he no longer had. The rejection festered, his emotions boiling beneath the surface. A mix of sadness, anger, and a growing sense of resentment that he couldn't seem to shake. What happens when a fragile mind is pushed to its breaking point? When rejection isn't just felt, but consumed, growing into something destructive? For Aaron Schmidt, this moment marked the beginning of an unthinkable plan, and for the Callahans, it was the last warning they would ever receive. January 31, 2011, began like any other rainy afternoon in East Georgia. The grey skies and steady drizzle seemed unremarkable, blending into the hum of a quiet neighborhood. 14-year-old Alana Callahan stepped off the school bus, her older sister Amanda waiting in the truck at the end of the long driveway. The routine felt ordinary, safe. But what they didn't know was that danger was already inside their home, waiting. Aaron Schmidt had crossed a line once before, sneaking into the Callahan home uninvited. He had been warned, told in no uncertain terms that he wasn't welcome without permission. But today, he ignored those warnings. His shoes, wet from the rain, sat neatly on the foyer mat, a small detail that would later stand out like a beacon of his defiance. He had entered their world once again, this time with far darker intentions. As Alana settled into her afternoon, logging onto Facebook at the dining table, Amanda left to pick up their younger brother Chase from the bus stop. It was just a few minutes, 10 at most. But in that brief window of time, everything unraveled. When Amanda and Chase returned, the house felt off. It wasn't immediately clear what was wrong, but Amanda noticed the tipped-over chair at the dining table, a sight so unusual it stopped her in her tracks. Then came the blood, a pool of red on the floor, spreading like a grotesque stain on the fabric of their lives. At first, she thought it might be something innocent, Kool-Aid maybe, or spilled ketchup, but deep down she knew better. Frantic now, Amanda called out for her sister. Her voice echoed through the empty house, unanswered. Alana's name, once so full of life and laughter, now hung in the air like a plea. With Chase at her side, she rushed outside, desperate for any sign of her sister. And then Aaron appeared. He pointed toward the woods, his voice frantic, his face a mask of feigned concern. "Someone took Alana," he said. The words landed like a blow, sending Amanda racing toward the spot he indicated. What she found there would haunt her forever. Under the shadow of the trees, Alana's lifeless body lay crumpled, her face pale against the blood that stained the ground. A gaping wound near her chin spoke to the violence of her final moments. Amanda tried to revive her, performing CPR through tears and panic, but it was too late. Her sister was gone. Aaron stood nearby, watching the scene unfold, his demeanor shifting between calculated hysteria and eerie detachment. He reached down, brushing a twig from Alana's hair, and then muttered something chilling. "They're going to think I did this." The horror of the moment was only beginning to sink in. For the Callahans, the loss was unbearable. For the investigators who had arrived moments later, the scene was the start of a tangled web of lies, betrayal, and a truth. In the chaos that followed the discovery of Alana's body, Aaron Schmidt was right there, standing alongside Amanda and Chase, as if he were just another devastated friend. His face carried the weight of concern. His voice trembled as he pointed toward the woods, and his hands hovered anxiously, as though unsure of what to do next. To anyone watching, he looked like a young boy overwhelmed by the horror of the moment. But was it genuine grief, or something far more calculated? Aaron's demeanor shifted with unsettling frequency. One moment he seemed frantic, almost inconsolable, insisting that someone had taken Alana. The next, he was oddly composed, inserting himself into conversations and offering unsolicited details about what might have happened. He even brushed a twig from Alana's hair, a gesture that should have been tender, but instead felt disturbingly out of place. When investigators arrived, Aaron didn't hesitate to tell his version of events. He claimed to have seen a man, dressed in black, fleeing through the woods. His voice rose as he described the supposed intruder, adding detail upon detail, as though rehearsing a story he had told himself 1,000 times. But something about his tone, about the way his eyes darted nervously between the officers, made them pause. The inconsistencies in his account were glaring. At first, Aaron described the intruder as someone he didn't recognize. Then he changed his story, claiming it might have been a neighbor he had seen before. As the hours passed, his narrative shifted again, each version bending to fit the questions being asked. To the investigators, it was clear. Aaron wasn't just a witness. He was hiding something. As the investigation continued, Aaron's behavior grew even more erratic. He interrupted officers mid-sentence, pointed out irrelevant details, and made repeated comments about how the police might think he was responsible. To those around him, it sounded less like fear and more like a warning, an admission cloaked in denial. And with every word, every gesture, every misplaced emotion, the questions grew louder. Was he truly the concerned friend he pretended to be? Or had the Callahans unknowingly invited a wolf into their home? When the investigators first sat down with Aaron Schmidt, he was calm. Too calm for a boy who had just witnessed the brutal death of someone he once called a friend. At first, his story seemed straightforward. A shadowy figure, dressed in black, had been lurking in the woods. Aaron claimed to have seen him running away just moments before Alana was discovered. It was a story that painted him as an innocent bystander, a terrified witness caught in the aftermath of a tragedy. But something wasn't right. As detectives pressed him for details, Aaron's story began to shift. At first, the intruder was a complete stranger, an ominous figure with no face or name. Minutes later, Aaron changed course, suggesting it might have been a neighbor, a man known for his eccentric behavior. His words stumbled over each other as he added unnecessary details, his voice growing shaky, but never breaking. Each version of his story felt like a performance, rewritten on the spot to fit the investigators' questions. The inconsistencies didn't stop there. When asked why his shoes were in the foyer, Aaron claimed he had simply stopped by to check on Alana. But why had he entered the house when he knew he was banned? And why had he been so quick to find her body, pointing to the exact spot in the woods, as if he had already known she was there. While Aaron's words tangled themselves into a web of contradictions, the evidence told a much clearer story. The crime scene revealed clues he couldn't explain away. A tipped-over chair, blood on the floor, and drag marks leading from the house to the woods. But the most damning discovery came hours later. Hidden in the forest behind the Callahan home. There, investigators found a gun, its cold metal tarnished by the damp soil. Ballistic tests would later confirm the undeniable truth. The gun had fired the bullet that killed Alana. And Aaron's fingerprints? They were all over it. As the web of lies unraveled, detectives began to see Aaron's story for what it was. A desperate attempt to shift blame, to cast himself as a victim rather than the perpetrator. He insisted he had nothing to do with the gun, claiming it must have been planted or stolen. But every piece of evidence pointed in one direction. Aaron Schmidt had done more than witness a tragedy. He had orchestrated it. The once trusting boy who had been embraced by the Callahan family now stood exposed, his facade cracking under the weight of his own deception. With every lie, every false lead, Aaron wasn't just trying to escape the truth. He was burying himself deeper in it. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with grief and anticipation. On one side sat the Callahan family, their faces etched with pain, clutching memories of the daughter and sister they had lost. Across from them sat Aaron Schmidt, a boy they had once welcomed into their home, now facing the full weight of his actions. The trial wasn't just a fight for justice. It was a reckoning. Prosecutors wasted no time laying out their case. With every word, they painted a stark, unrelenting picture of Aaron's actions on that rainy January afternoon. They spoke of his calculated defiance, his presence in the Callahan home when he was forbidden to be there. They walked the jury through the evidence, the gun found hidden in the woods, the fingerprints that tied him to the weapon, and the ballistic tests that proved its connection to Alana's death. Each fact was another piece of the puzzle, and when assembled, it revealed a chilling truth: a murder, planned and carried out with intent. But it wasn't just the evidence that spoke to Aaron's guilt. The prosecutors turned to the heart of the case: Alana. They brought forward her parents, her siblings, each testimony like a wound reopened. Paul and Betty Jo Callahan recounted the day Aaron entered their lives, how they treated him like one of their own, and how that trust had been shattered. Amanda, the sister who found Alana's body, took the stand, her voice breaking as she relived the horror of that afternoon. Each word was a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the devastating loss that had forever altered their family. Aaron's defense tried to paint a different story, one of a troubled boy caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. They spoke of his abusive childhood, the neglect he endured, the anger and pain that shaped him. But as the trial unfolded, it became clear that while his past explained his struggles, it did not excuse his choices. The evidence against him was too overwhelming, his lies too tangled to untie. After days of testimony and hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the foreperson stood to deliver the words that would seal Aaron's fate: guilty. For the Callahan family, the verdict was a small step toward healing. It couldn't bring Alana back, but it was a recognition of her life and the senseless act that ended it. For Aaron, it marked the end of a journey that began with kindness and ended in betrayal. Looking back, the signs were always there. Aaron Schmidt's life had been shaped by chaos, abuse that left invisible scars, neglect that taught him to suppress his pain, and anger that simmered quietly beneath the surface. Aaron's past told a story of resilience, but also of deep emotional wounds left untreated. A childhood filled with rejection had left him searching for stability, clinging to the Callahan family as his safe haven. Yet, as he became more entwined in their lives, his boundaries blurred. What the Callahans saw as trust, Aaron saw as dependency. A lifeline he couldn't bear to lose. In the end, Alana Callahan's story is a devastating reminder of the consequences of overlooking the shadows in someone's past. Aaron Schmidt was a boy who needed help, a boy who couldn't outrun his own demons. But his unresolved anger, his unchecked obsession, became a weapon, and Alana paid the ultimate price. In the quiet town where the Callahan family once laughed together, life has never felt the same. The shadows of that tragic January afternoon linger in every corner. A constant reminder of a loss too heavy to bear. Her death sent shockwaves through the community, rippling far beyond the boundaries of her home. Neighbors mourned, friends questioned how such a tragedy could happen, and the family was left grappling with the unbearable weight of what could never be undone. Trust, once so freely given, now feels fragile, and the kindness that brought Aaron into their lives has become a bittersweet memory. Alana's story is one of love, hope, and heartbreak, a tale of how quickly the bonds we cherish can be shattered. But it's also a call to remember her, not for the way her life ended, but for the joy and light she brought into the world. As the community moves forward, they are left with a haunting question. How do you rebuild after such profound loss? Perhaps the answer lies in the legacy of Alana herself. A reminder to love fiercely, to protect the vulnerable, and to see the value in every moment we have with those we hold dear. Thank you for joining us in honoring her memory. For more stories like this one, subscribe to True Crime Stories Vault and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that demands to be told.